man was walking in the woods one day when he saw a bear out of the corner of his eye. He stopped, said a silent prayer. God, I know you can do all things. Will you please make this bear a fellow Christian? The bear caught up to the man, placed his paw on the man's shoulder, and said, Brother, will you pray with me? Dear God, for this meal that I am about to receive, make me truly thankful. This is The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilsky. Welcome to episode 35 of The Christian Bear. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Hilskamp. On this episode of The Christian Bear, we continue our discussion of beliefs, specifically looking at the beliefs of other people. I'm happy to welcome to the podcast today Ms. Sonia Marie David. Sonia is a former student and good friend of mine. Presently, she is a member of the Council of Urban Professionals Fellowship Cohort for 2022. Sonia is a pleasure advocate and DEI professional who earned her BA at the University of Vermont and her Master of Divinity at Harvard University, where she focused on the interconnections of race, religious identity, community, culture, and inclusion. As a creative, Sonia loves writing and giving voice to new ideas. On Valentine's Day 2023, she will be featured in an anthology entitled Wanting, Women Writing About Desire. She is also launching a podcast entitled Getting Defenseless with Sonia M. David, where she plans to explore how to ignite our passion for pleasure, heal our relationship with lust, and embrace the love that comes with the most intimate of journeys. If you're looking for Sonia, she enjoys traveling to new places and is likely somewhere with warm weather and a beach. She is working on a memoir about leading a defenseless life as a Black woman. Again, join me in welcoming Sonia Marie David to The Christian Bear. Sonia, thank you again for being on The Christian Bear today. To get us started with talking about belief, I'm calling this the easy question. Mm-hmm. What do you believe?
Yeah, I know it's an easy question, but oh my gosh, if I didn't spend like every day thinking and rethinking the answer to that question since you asked it, then I haven't done anything. So what I believe is that there's an abundance of love that kind of constitutes this creative force. And that creative force that I'm calling love, many people call God. I believe that it's this creative force of love, this God energy that kind of determines what we see in the world, develops what we see. And the negative things that we see aren't an absence of it, but rather our distance from it, if that makes sense, but that it's always there. And not just always there outside of us, around us, but in us and makes us up, and therefore we are it. Like we are that creative force, we are that love in many ways. It's hard for me to say it because of my background, but like we are kind of that God figure made manifest in the love that we see in one another. And that creative energy, that force, some people call it source, some people call it God, like I mentioned, that love also desperately wants to fulfill our desires, and that we were born to want, we were born to have desire, we were born to enjoy this life, I think, and that includes our bodies, right? So pleasure is a part of our human experience. And anytime that we kind of back away from that, we back away from a very important way to understand God, to understand love, and to understand the creative force of the universe that makes us what we are and makes the world around us all of the things that we've experienced it to be. So that's kind of the short version of it. And I know that there are going to be more questions, but I think like that would be where I would start.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's so much in what you just said that I really resonate with, but you know, kind of to pick out 2 points. I love how you talked about it as both in relation to sort of having touch with love with this creative force, but also being in the absence thereof. I think that I'm not sure it's a duality, but that sort of that duality is I think is very important. I've definitely seen it in my life. Um, as well as you made the comment of it's a little bit hard for you to perhaps say frame certain things because of your background, and but I wonder, to include pleasure when we talk about God, that also, at least from my background in the church, is it would also be very difficult.
Yeah.
um, and so actually I'm kind of curious. I wonder if you could expand on that, um, because I think love gets characterized, particularly in Christianity, in a certain way, but pleasure sometimes is very different, or has a very different connotation. So I wonder if you could you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. I want to roll back a little bit to something that you said about kind of the duality. So I want to make sure that I say it more clearly because it's kind of unique, I think, the way that I want to frame it. And so it's not that like there is no such thing as an absence of love. And I know that's like I know that's a hard thing to hear and believe in a world that like clearly has problems. But what I'm saying is that those difficulties, those challenges, those hardships and negative experiences are a manifestation of our lack of proximity to love, but it's always there. And I feel like that's important because, it's easy to kind of go one way or the other. But my kind of way of looking at it is that it's always there. And then whether we're seeing that positively manifested or if we're seeing these negative manifestations has a lot to do with our proximity to the core love inside of us or that love around us, however we want to kind of align ourselves. But it's a manifestation of that alignment. Um, and then to get into why it was hard for me to kind of say the aspect of pleasure and why that's so important to me. Um, so going way back, I've had this really unique intimacy with myself where I always wanted to understand more of what I liked. And I was basically, as a young Black girl, like very nervous about everything that had to do with other people. I had like a healthy skepticism of kind of everything around me, because I knew that there was this idea that, we're supposed to be here for something and do good, and I could do that. Um, and there was this idea that like I would see everywhere, especially growing up in the 90s, of needing to be like a superwoman. And I didn't really not want to be that, but I didn't really want to only be that. And so the best way that I could find to have that intimacy was to be close to myself. Because I was figuring a lot out at a pretty early age. Um, but there wasn't really a place in my theological background as a Baptist woman where I could tap into that and say, this is the theological backing for why pleasure is so important for me. And so I kind of kept it to myself, even though it was the thing that was really driving my ability to feel secure in myself from I think I was about the age of like maybe 9 when I started to explore myself. And when I say that, I do mean physically, right? And really start to understand myself, regardless of whether I liked like any particular gender or any particular person with any particular sex. Like I just wanted to understand, what do I like, how do I feel, and how can I get closer to God through that. And there was just nowhere for me to do that, where I was coming up. The Black church, we talk about love in terms of matrimony and courtship. We talk about, pleasure in terms of a gift God gave us so that we could like it, right? But we don't really get a chance to think about how our relationship with ourselves and our understanding of ourselves really manifests itself as our exclamation point, our exclamation mark. And by that, and I don't know what your audience is like, but I mean orgasms. Right. And I don't know if you knew what you were getting into, but a huge part of my current path has to do with talking about my connection with building that self relationship, that self love, and that self enjoyment, that pleasure. Um, and how I relate to others and how I can uplift and encourage others to do the same for themselves so that we can be truly the most well rounded, best version of ourselves, um, without just eschewing the parts of ourselves that are hard to talk about in public. And this essay that I'm working on right now, or actually, it's been accepted as an anthology contribution in a piece called "Wanting: Women Writing About Desire." I get into kind of this full story, really, of my relationship to pleasure as an individual, and my relationship to the importance of orgasms, and specifically clitoral orgasms. And the reason that it's so important to me is because it actually is threatened later on in my 20s. Um, a lot of people can understand and know about FGM. They know about intersex surgeries that are done on babies and on young girls. But what folks may not know about, and of course, why would you? There's this condition that a very small number of women have had, that creates a cyst, right? And that cyst, in my case, was in like a very unlikely place, my actual organ. And so I went through this process of being, grateful every day for over the course of about 8 or 10 years for the ability to have one. And I started to really consciously think about what my life would be like without that part of me. And so the essay really just like kind of works through that. But I didn't have the theological space. So that essay, I write about how I prayed during masturbation, how I was praising God, right? As I was having an orgasm after each moment where, blood is spilt, that after all, I can still feel, and how important that was to me in a way that, I've never heard anyone else talk about it.
I have so many thoughts that I'm not sure which one to pick up right now. Um, and I want to say thank you for just saying that and speaking that, both just into the world, but also on this podcast where you don't really know the audience. And frankly, I'm still getting used to my own audience. As someone who loves to just say things and let them be out there in the world, I just want to honor what you just said, and again that you had the courage to say it. Um, so I'm going to
Thank
move
you.
on to my second question, even though again there are tons of thoughts that are going on in my head. I just can't form those into meaningful, coherent
Hmm.
words at this exact moment.
Well, yeah, and if we need to, we can come back to it.
Totally. So how have you come to hold those beliefs?
Yeah. So I think I came to hold those beliefs because I questioned what was being told to me over and over again. Um, a huge thing that was kind of the message, right? Was that the joy that God gave can't be taken away. Like I got that in the music in my church. I got that in biblical texts that would come up during sermons, the messages of these sermons. And yet, joy always had to be after some horrible thing happen. And in the Black church, I feel like that's especially common because, our tradition is born out of the transatlantic slave trade experience and persevering and developing a theology that could liberate and uplift. So it makes sense that there's always this dark underbelly to joy. There's always this threat of loss within that too. And I wanted to challenge that because I was like, I think God made me out of love, that God is love, and that therefore love abounds. So maybe it doesn't have to be the way that it has been. Maybe there's a way for me to reorient myself such that even in a world that expects me to expect pain, that I can turn around and for no reason that anyone else could explain, have faith in enjoyment, have faith in pleasure. And so it was a bit of a rebellion, right? This idea that I could have all this goodness and not be fearful of anything else, and build a relationship with myself without needing the um, validation of others, and to have this kind of kinky connection with myself that includes God, doesn't exclude, isn't something I hope that God never knows about, because God is the love that I express and experience and feel, right? Um, and then that love manifests itself as pleasure is something that I believe God would do openly, right? Otherwise, it would not, I feel like it would just simply not be that great. And so to be able to come to that from a place where I'm stepping away from what I've been taught and move towards something that I haven't seen before, um, was in some ways hard, because now talking about it, I'm thinking about all the messaging that I used to receive, and how this could land. But on the other end, I think every time I speak to a friend, or I'm connecting with somebody who I lightly know, like a casual acquaintance, it's just so easy for us to talk about these kinds of things, these subjects. We can talk about, well, what is sex with your partner like, and what do you like, and have you talked to them about it, and just have them be so bare, and trusting, and know that it's because I have that openness and love to share with them, and space to receive their questions and their need and their desires, and to work through those so that they can enjoy themselves more. Um, so I think those are like some of the initial things that led me to this. But then I would also add that there are some really important thinkers that have influenced me. So Toni Morrison is a huge one. She wrote about how she was combating literary racism by writing for her audience and not explaining the background, the same way that white authors will write everything out beautifully and then suddenly be like, and this person was black, right? They have to explain that, but everything else you're supposed to assume is this universe that is based on this white imaginary. She took that and said, well, we can write a world like that too. And so you have to either be in that world or ask for entry by learning about the literary um, elements of her work to really appreciate Morrison. And so I think I wanted to kind of do that for myself, to just live out what I think is most valid and true, and let other people come to it who understand it and are craving it, but then also, not so much worry about the folks who are going to kind of turn around and go, well, what's that? And wag a finger. But hopefully that folks could kind of start to see, oh, well, I get this pleasure part over here. I'm a little bit nervous about that part, but we can get there, and let folks work their journey out. Um, so she was a huge influence. And then I'm trying to think of, oh, and her joy, just her focus on love, Um, in her pieces, she's so raw. And I feel like I was able to tap into my truth and be comfortable putting it out there fully descriptively, especially in this first essay that I've published, just because I didn't feel like I had to say it in a way that people could understand. I wanted to say it in a way people couldn't help but understand, right? And I feel like she really influenced that piece. Um, and just listening to, there are a few people I listen to who I think have really influenced me. Um, James Baldwin is a huge one. The way that he characterizes the systems around him without accepting them as what must be encouraged me to do the same. So when he would talk about, you know, the so-called American Negro, he was acknowledging that this is a way that folks talk about us, but that doesn't have to be, right? That there's a system that needs us to have a name, but that name doesn't define us. And then going on to speak about, and not just speak about, but also develop these plays and novels that would describe us in ways that allow us to have a future. I wanted to incorporate that and to give our pleasure a future in space, because in some ways I feel like our pleasure barely has enough breath to exist right now. But I want our pleasure to have a future too.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but I wonder if what your thoughts would be on this. Do you see something
Hmm.
inherently, for lack of a better word, liberating in what in this in how you're framing pleasure and how you're talking about orgasm, how you're talking about this kind of exploration of ourself? Um, I keep hearing liberating and liberation, although I admit
Mm.
that as a queer white man, whenever I start thinking about liberation, it's either possibly a good thing or possibly a bad thing. And I know there's a lot bound up there. So I'm curious, do you see these as acts of liberation?
Mm. You know, tapping into that queer point for a second, um, I think it is. I think it is a liberation, because it's embracing a queerness that is internal, which to me is hugely important. I identify as a queer person as well, but my queerness I feel like is very much so to do with like my relationship with myself, and so this fits so well for me. Um, it's almost never been an externalized thing, and so I just, when I think about liberation and pleasure and engaging in this project of understanding our pleasure, embracing it and letting it become a part of our self expression and a part of the way that we relate with others, and let it drive kind of the steps that we take as individuals, I think it can't not be liberating in some regards, but it's not liberating in the sense that we are bound by others. It's liberating in the sense that we are unbound to ourselves. We can just be unbridled in that way internally. And that's not something anyone can give you, right? This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world can't take it away. Just as much as the world didn't give me this pleasure, it had to come from inside of me. Once I've embraced it, it can't take it away, but nothing is keeping me from it but me and my belief about it based on what the world has said. But the moment I embrace that the world didn't give it to me and that the world can't take it away, I feel like that is truly an act of liberation and rebellion right there, because you're pushing away that idea that someone else can have it. or take it from you. There's no shortage. That's where the abundance of love comes in. That it's not ending. There isn't a measure of it that can just be taken out. Because so long as I'm here, it's here with me.
Has any experience made you question your beliefs? And if so, how did your beliefs change?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to be honest, the belief that I shared was a change in belief, right? I used to believe that struggle was absolutely necessary, that there was always a cost to any benefit, that there wasn't anything that could just be good for the sake of it being good. Um, so I didn't really have an understanding of a abundance. There was always a bit of scarcity peppered in with that, that made it so that nothing could come from nothing. There had to be a price to pay. Um, and so the belief that I had to really grapple with, and that I changed my mind about, was another one that's a big deal, and that's Jesus dying on the cross for my sins. I don't actually think about it in terms of that. I think that Jesus died for me for other reasons, but not that one. Um, and that was something that was huge. It cracked my whole universe open, because the second that I started questioning, why would God send anyone that they love, but let alone their child, to this planet, knowing exactly what was going to happen so that they could fix something that theoretically would have been God's mistake, because God made us exactly the way that we are. And like put all of that, it's the paragon of having the child pay for the parent's sins. And so it just did not compute. The math wasn't mathing. The moment I thought about it long enough, I realized that just can't be why. And I acknowledge and admit that I will never understand. Um, but I do believe that the sacrifice that was made was a sacrifice not of love to save us from the perils of sin and death, and the cost of sin, which is eternal death, but instead was a sacrifice of love for the sake of love, to show that love is worth that. um to show that there is a way to inspire literally thousands of years of generations of people to consider love as the backbone of their relationship with what? God, or as at least in the Christian context, love itself, right? God is love is a full verse, right? And so that is like the bit, that's the whopper, that was the white whale. That was the thing that once I got up to that and said, maybe there's a question here, everything followed from there, as far as me starting to have a full theological connection with pleasure that was out loud, that I couldn't run away from it anymore. It was every time I looked at something, every time I heard a preacher speak, every time that I engaged in anything theological or frankly secular, um, I was just overwhelmed with this awareness that it couldn't be, that a loving, caring being would put anyone or anything in a position um, to sacrifice so much, to teach us a lesson. That couldn't have been it, or to save us from ourselves, despite being made this way by the Creator. Using that background.
Totally. And our listeners, unfortunately, can't see me smiling and nodding as you're saying that, but that was the exact same for me. except to say or to question what we needed salvation from, if not from God, God's self, then I don't know. Why require a sacrifice to need salvation from yourself, sort of thing.
Exactly. And why would we need salvation if we were made by God and everything that God made was perfect? And how could we fall if we were perfect? It doesn't. It does. The math wasn't
No,
mathing.
I agree. I agree. So this is probably I joked at the beginning that the easy question was what do you believe. Perhaps this is the harder question of these questions I proposed. But looking at your belief system, looking at what you believe, how you put that into words, how you manifest that. If you had to boil it down to kind of one or two core fundamental beliefs, what would that belief or what would those beliefs be?
Yeah. So the first one is the one I started with, which is God is love. Um, Love is the creator. Therefore, theoretically, if we're going based on the kind of Judeo-Christian understanding of God, which I have, so that's the one I'm going with. So God is love. Love is the creator. The creator creates from love, right? Out of that energy of love. And what is made is love. So there is nothing on this earth or in creation that is not love, which means God is literally everywhere around us and in us. We are, therefore, God. A manifestation of God is the closest I can come to saying it in public. But know that in my heart, I say the whole thing. Um, so that is like the top piece for me, and then the second, genuinely, is that I truly believe we are on this earth to enjoy this life. Heaven is on earth, right? Like in now, not after we die. So if we don't get it, our hope is in the future where we are able to embrace that pleasure, to believe in our innate birthright, right? To enjoy this planet while we're on it, and to make sure that this planet is a place where the species that we have the ability to look after are looked after, right? Beyond just humans. And I would say those are kind of the peak beliefs for me.
Amen. Thank you. So I always like holding time at the end for anything else you might want to add or anything that you're working on that you'd like to promote. Um, Take it away.
Thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm really enjoying getting to have this kind of heart to heart. I know that there are other folks listening, so thank you for listening. But this is just so cool to share these thoughts and to share them with someone who I look up to, like I have you, Ben. So thank you so much for inviting me to share this space together. So I mentioned earlier that I am an anthology contributor to a piece called Wanting Women Writing About Desire. It comes out Valentine's Day 2023. And I talk about building a practice of self love and self pleasure, self desire, and self exploration, in the face of, a really big threat to those things. But I feel like it's it gets at the core of something that is so important to me and something that I feel is so valuable, across genders and across sexes. Hopefully people will be able to relate or understand, people who are, facing those threats, whether they're born intersex again, or whether or not they are thinking about social issues like, FGM, but that folks will start to, have some language around it and have some examples from a person who really was just very unlucky. When I say that that condition was super rare, I believe that a full 36 people have had something like it ever. on in recorded medical documentation, but only 18 have had, like I have, on that most sensitive organ. Um, and then only a very small portion of us were not victims of FGM, that it was just totally random. And that's from 19, I believe 1957 to the present. And the study was done, let's say, in 2010. So there probably haven't been so many since then, but at least one. Um, and so I hope that, if folks are connecting to this story, that they will take some time to connect with that piece, because it did a lot of work for me in a good way, and it helps me connect to um, people even after I've written it, especially after, because now I can actually kind of articulate what this is like, and hold space even more um, readily for people who want to jump into that subject.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. And I will make sure, if you can give me a link, I will make sure that the link for your anthology is in the description for this episode, for anyone who might be interested.
Yes, of course. And I feel like I should give a big shout out. So I'm going to just make sure that I don't forget to give credit. So again, the piece is called "Wanting: Women Writing About Desire." The release date is February 14th, 2023, and it is co-edited by two really fantastic people, Kelly McMasters and, sorry, I just want to make sure that I get the names of the co-editors down. So it's Kelly McMasters and Margot Kahn. And I'm just double checking. Yes, Margot Kahn and Kelly McMasters. And they are two outstanding writer editors. There are quite a few other really engaging essayists in this piece, a bunch of new folks, and some pretty well-known people as well, Sue Shapiro among them.
Well, again, Sonia, thank you so much for being on the Christian Bear today. Um, Again, I will put information, a little bit more information about Sonia in the information description, as well as about the anthology that she mentioned. And and again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This has been the Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilsky.